So now it's time for a little more difficult talk. For those of you that don't know, I'm just trying to create peace in this world. It's a promise to my son. So I look at everything we're doing and try and figure out solutions to the problems that we face. And I think that drugs and addiction is a major problem that we are facing, and it's rampant in all of society, and we got to figure out what we can do. Lives are being lost, families are being affected, trauma is being just reciprocated. And so what do we do to fix this terrible situation that we find ourselves in? Right now, the system kind of prospers off addiction, and it's really kind of heartbreaking to see the way the system functions, because they make money off of it on all ends, and that's all they seem to focus on. And they prosper off people's addictions and heartache, and it just breaks my heart to see it. And it's hard to break the cycle because the system has it so ingrained to us, ingrained in our brains with propaganda, that this is the only way to think. But if you step back and look at it, we're putting people in prisons that are funded by the people that fund politicians. So the people that own these prisons, they fund politicians, and they create laws like drug laws to keep these prisons full. And what we've done is we've created a mentality to where we look at people who are struggling with addictions like terrible people that need to be locked up, when in reality most of the time addiction stems from a traumatic experience in one's life that they're just trying to numb away and stop feeling the pain from. And that's usually where addiction stems from. I'm not going to say always, there's a lot of other factors, family and influence or hereditary, and there's just a lot of stuff. But I think that that's the major contributing factor that just seems to be the copy and pastes in all addiction, is that there's been some kind of traumatic experience, and the addiction stems from that. And that's the hardest part, is that these people are hurting and the system's prospering off of it. And it's not just one side, because people who get their drugs off the street, they go and they get put in jail, and then they go to prison, and everybody looks at that as like a great thing. But at the same time, doctors are prescribing these same exact drugs, the same exact drugs, all day, every day, and people relish these doctors as heroes. So you got a drug dealer over here who they just think is just the most terrible person in the world, and they got a doctor over here giving the same exact drug, and they treat him as a hero. And at the same time, they're both dealing out addictions, and they're both creating a massive problem in the world, and they're both affecting lives, not just with the addiction, but with the lives lost. I know more people that have lost their lives to legal drugs than illegal drugs, and I've known people that have lost their lives from both, unfortunately, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. But at some point, we got to recognize that this is the problem that we're facing, and not just, the drugs on the street, and we're just going to throw them all in jail and make everything better, because that's clearly not the answer. The war on drugs is failing, and we have to do something different. It's clearly not working. So at what point do we say, what's a different idea to try and fix this? And so what's the solution we can do? Instead of locking people up in jail, how about we create rehabs and open up beds for them? So we have to recognize that the problem is addiction and not anything other than that. So what we have is we're walking a very dangerous line, to where we got the court system profiting off of addiction, the prisons profiting off of addiction, the doctors profiting off addiction, and nobody is really finding any solutions. The war on drugs is lost, and it seems to be getting worse and worse, and that seems to be an inherent trait in mankind, that we want to do drugs, and with the drugs comes addiction. And so we have to recognize the addiction problem instead of profiting off of it from both sides. Currently, the doctors are regarded as heroes for prescribing the same exact drugs that are on the street. Heroin is an opiate. It's derived from an opium plant, and you can't grow it here legally in the U.S. Ironically enough, it's usually grown in places where we're currently at war. But you got to realize that all the illegal drugs, there's a legal counterpart. I know more people that have died from legal drugs than illegal drugs, and I've known people that have died from both sides. But generally, the legal drugs are sought after because you know they're good and they have the same ingredients. Once again, heroin is an opiate derived from the opium plant, but so is morphine, Percocet, Dilaudid, any of the opiate families there, Oxycontin. Those are all opiates as well. So it's the same drug, the same chemical, the same everything that is ruining lives. And we put people in prison on one end over here, but then on the other end, we let doctors give the same exact addiction, same exact drug, and regard them as heroes. And on both sides, addiction's running rampant, and overdoses are happening, and lives are being lost and massively affected. And it just seems like the system prospers from both ends and both ends of our addiction, as a humanity, as a species, or whatever. And instead of fixing the problem, we're trying to help people. They throw them in jail on this end, and they rip them away from their families and cause just massive trauma and hardships. And then on the other end, they just act like it's not even a thing and let doctors do what they want and just let everything go on. And I'm going to go ahead and throw in alcohol too. As somebody who has been an alcoholic and worked and still does work through my stuff there, alcohol is regarded as like this party drug or whatever, and everything's fun and stuff, but we don't ever really acknowledge the fact that there's a massive addiction there as well, and that this party mentality and stuff, it does have a downside, and that there will be massive consequences and repercussions for long-term use. And it's just it's almost frowned upon by society to try and actually help people or do something about this addiction, because then, you know, everybody might have to look inside themselves a little bit if we started doing that. And I think that might be a good thing, is that we start, you know, trying to recognize addiction and helping each other out, and instead of throwing these people in jail on the poor spectrum, or getting drugs off the streets, or propping up people who are prescribing these drugs and pretending like it's not a problem, and still the same addictions are happening. How about we just put our arms around the people we love and the people struggling with these addictions and try and help get them better and break away from the addiction and break away from the cycle? And I think that's fundamentally the problem that we face, is that the system's set up to prosper off addiction, and instead of that, we need to take the money aspect out of it and help people. And that involves boots on the ground and trying to help your neighbor and having hard talks with somebody. You know, it's much easier to just turn your back and say, well, that's their decision. And at some point you have to, because a person won't get better if they don't want to. So, but once again, that's the struggle that we got to find ourselves in, is to try and help get these people clean, to maybe, you know, help them see the light. And that's just, as long as there is no victim and nobody's hurting themselves, anybody else other than themselves, I think they should be free to do what they want. And instead of offering a jail cell for all these people, let's instead offer them a rehab. Because I've known a lot of people that wanted to go to rehab, and they couldn't go because there were no beds. But we always have a jail cell available for somebody that's harming themselves. And it seems counterproductive. If I wanted to walk over to a tree over here and just bang my head against that tree until I die, I mean, that's my legal right. There's no law that says I can't bang my head against a tree and die, or until I just absolutely harm myself or whatever. I can't. There's no law that says I can't try a backflip on a motorcycle or any stupid thing that I might want to do. But when it comes to drugs, we suddenly think it's okay to regulate somebody else's body or something else. Now, if they're harming their family, if they're child neglect, then that's a crime. Or if they're stealing things to pay for their addiction, that's a crime. But if there is no victim, there is no crime. And instead of treating these people terribly, let's try and raise them up, and let's try and keep our communities together, and let's just try and get them clean, and just change the way we think of things. I know it's kind of crazy, but, and also help people that are struggling with addiction that are ignored. You know, there's a lot of people struggling with alcoholism or from addictions from pills that doctors that give them. like I said, the opiates are the same, but there's also Adderall and meth, same thing. Doctors prescribe it all day. Any barbiturates, Xanax, or like Valium or stuff like that, those are highly addictive as well. And people are struggling with these addictions, and it's just ignored and brushed under the rug. And it's just as bad as the people we throw in prison, but the whole system's prospering off of it on the other side, so they act like it's just great. And there's nothing wrong. And like I said, we got to focus on helping people and realizing that there's addiction out there, and at the same time realizing that everybody's free to do their own thing. And if somebody's on a self-destructive path, we as loved ones and people who are caring and compassionate, instead of turning our heads, we just have to kindly try and be a bumper. That's the hard thing, is when you see somebody messing up, you want to control them and come in, and it's just so simple to be like, oh, you're destroying your lives, I'm going to come in and control you, and that'll just create more resistance. But we got to kind of try and be a loving bumper and not give up on them. I know from all this experience, from my own personal experiences, I'm not trying to preach without having dealt with addiction myself and with dealing with loved ones that were going through addiction and all of this. And I feel that at the end of it all, let's just love each other and try and get past our hurt and our resentment, and just try and help raise each other up and help people with addiction. And I think that is the hard talk that we need to have. I mean, we need to be able to sit down and talk about drugs openly and have these hard talks and try and work for solutions, because what we're doing is failing us. And addiction's running rampant on both sides, and lives are being hurt and traumatized. And so I'm just trying to help as many lives as I can. If we can just change the perceptions and perspectives that we have, maybe we can just do things a little different and actually fix some things instead of this failed war on drugs policy. So my views are quite different than most, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense after it all. So I'm just trying to help the world. And like I said, it's just a simple way of, instead of offering jail cells, let's offer them rehabs. And as long as they haven't harmed anybody, let's raise each other up. And even locally, just do all we can to help each other. And if you have stories or you have a desire to help, let's go create rehabs if we have to. And instead of depending on the government, just put boots on the ground and just do all we can locally. And you know, I'm not saying this as anybody other than trying to spread an idea, because I obviously couldn't do this everywhere all over the planet. I can't put my boots on the ground and just go fix every community. So it's up to you hearing this everywhere to go do something about it and to actually try, because we just ignore it now. And it's much easier, much more convenient to just let Big Brother or whatever just deal with it the way they're doing it. But that's what has let society get to the point that it has, is that we just are complacent and let government run everything. And there comes a point where we need to actually do something. So I'm just, like I said, trying to help the world. Please stay positive through all this. And as long as we stay positive and try and raise each other up, I think that we'll be all right. And just don't get down with the negative and fighting and arguing, and just keep the goal in sight. And I know that we can do anything we set our minds to, so we just got to work together to create a better way. I know we can do it. So I appreciate everybody keeping up. Follow with me. I'm going to be doing this kind of stuff for a year, so feel free to keep up. And if anybody has more solutions, my number is 573-286-8316. I'd love to hear any solutions. I'll throw them in, and this is just like a working progress. Anybody that has anything to add, I'd love to hear it. So thank you guys. Appreciate y'all.